The crisis that changed everything. At 61 years old, Patricia Trish Morgan sat in her Honda Civic outside a Walmart in Scottsdale, Arizona, staring at her bank account on her phone. $847.32. That was everything. Her entire savings. Her safety net. Her retirement fund that was supposed to last another 20 or 30 years. 3 months earlier, her husband of 38 years, Richard, had walked out. Not just walked out, disappeared. Cleaned out their joint accounts, stopped paying the mortgage on the house they'd owned for 22 years, and moved to Florida with a woman 20 years younger he'd met on a business trip. The divorce was ugly and expensive. By the time the lawyers were done, Trish was left with barely anything. The house went into foreclosure. Her 401k had been depleted in the settlement. And at 61, with no college degree and 35 years as a stay-at-home mom, she had no career to fall back on. Her 3 adult children tried to help, but they had their own families, their own mortgages, their own struggles. Her daughter Jessica offered to let her move into their guest room in Seattle, but Trish couldn't bear the thought of being a burden. So here she was, 61 years old, broke, alone, starting over with less than $900 to her name. This is the story of what happened next. How a 61-year-old woman who thought her life was ending discovered it was actually beginning. How she went from sleeping in her car to building a 6-figure income. How she transformed rock bottom into a launching pad. But getting there required confronting shame, fear, and the devastating question, am I too old to start over? It required refusing to be a victim of her circumstances, and instead becoming the architect of her own second act. Trish had never imagined her life would turn out this way. She'd married Richard right out of high school in 1983. He was ambitious, charming, working his way up in commercial real estate. She was supposed to finish her associate's degree at community college, but got pregnant with their first child, Jessica, at 20. Then came Michael 2 years later, and Sarah 3 years after that. Richard's career took off. He made good money. Bought them a nice house in a good neighborhood in Scottsdale. Trish stayed home with the kids. It made financial sense, he said. Daycare was expensive. And besides, he traveled a lot for work. Someone needed to be there for the children. So Trish became a full-time mom. She threw herself into it completely. PTA president, soccer team manager, volunteer coordinator at the elementary school. She made every meal from scratch, kept an immaculate house, threw elaborate birthday parties. She was good at it. The kids thrived. But somewhere along the way, she stopped being Trish and became just Richard's wife and the kids' mom. When Sarah left for college in 2016, Trish felt lost. The house was empty. Richard was traveling more than ever. She suggested maybe she could go back to school, finish her degree, get a part-time job. Something to fill the time. Richard had been dismissive. What would you even do? You haven't worked in 30 years. Just enjoy yourself. Take up tennis or book club or something. So she did. She took up tennis, joined a book club, volunteered at the local animal shelter, tried to convince herself this was enough. It wasn't. By 2023, their marriage was essentially over. They lived like roommates who barely spoke. Richard spent most of his time traveling or in his home office. Trish felt invisible in her own life. Then in March 2024, Richard came home and announced he wanted a divorce. He'd met someone. He was moving to Tampa. He wanted to sell the house. Trish was blindsided. She knew they weren't happy, but she'd assumed they'd just coast into old age together like so many other couples. Instead, at 60, she was suddenly facing the end of everything she'd known for nearly 4 decades. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Richard had been hiding money, moving assets, preparing for this for months. He had a high-powered attorney. Trish couldn't afford a good lawyer and ended up with a public defender who barely looked at her case. By the time everything was finalized in August, Trish walked away with almost nothing. Arizona was a community property state, but Richard's attorney had somehow made most of their assets disappear or look like his separate property. The judge awarded her a small portion of his 401k and ordered him to pay spousal support of $1,200 a month. Except Richard stopped paying after the first month. He'd moved to Florida and claimed he'd lost his job. Enforcing the order would require hiring another lawyer she couldn't afford. She moved out of the house in September, rented a small studio apartment in a rough part of town for $950 a month, got a job as a cashier at Target making $15 an hour. She lasted 3 weeks. Standing for 8-hour shifts at 61 with bad knees was agony. The young manager treated her like she was stupid. Customers were rude. She'd come home every night in tears. She quit. And that's when reality really hit. With no job, no savings, and $950 rent due in 2 weeks, Trish faced a choice. Accept her daughter's offer to move to Seattle and live as a dependent, or figure something else out. She couldn't do it. Couldn't move in with Jessica and her family. Couldn't become the elderly mother sleeping in the guest room, babysitting the grandkids, living on charity. She had to find another way. The day she couldn't pay October rent, her landlord gave her 30 days' notice. Trish packed up her few belongings, put most of it in a storage unit she could barely afford, and started sleeping in her Honda Civic. She parked in Walmart parking lots, in hospital parking garages where security didn't check, behind 24-hour gyms where she had a $10 membership so she could shower. She was homeless, at 61 years old. A college-educated woman from a good family who'd done everything right. Married young, raised kids, been a devoted wife, was now sleeping in her car. The shame was crushing. She couldn't tell her children. They thought she was still in the studio apartment. She made excuses why they couldn't visit, why she couldn't FaceTime, bad lighting she'd say, or she was out running errands. For 2 weeks, Trish lived in her car and searched desperately for jobs. Fast food, retail, house cleaning, anything. But everywhere wanted someone younger, or someone with recent experience, or someone who could pass a background check showing stable housing. One night, parked behind a Planet Fitness at 2 a.m., Trish sat in her car and cried harder than she'd ever cried in her life. She was 61 years old and had nothing. No home, no money, no prospects, no future. She pulled out her phone, thinking maybe she should finally call Jessica. Accept defeat. Become the burden she swore she'd never be. Instead, she opened Facebook, scrolled through her feed mindlessly, and saw a post from an old high school friend, Linda, who was raving about a side hustle she'd started selling handmade jewelry on Etsy. Made $300 this week. Linda had written, "Never too old to learn something new." Trish stared at that post for a long time. Never too old to learn something new. She'd spent 35 years raising kids, managing a household, organizing events, solving problems. She was smart, capable, resourceful. She just never monetized any of it. What if she could? Trish opened a new browser tab and typed, "How to make money online with no experience." That search, made at 2 a.m. in a Walmart parking lot by a desperate 61-year-old woman sleeping in her car, changed everything. The discovery. Trish spent the next 3 hours in her car, illuminated by her phone screen, going down a rabbit hole of possibilities. She read about dropshipping, affiliate marketing, virtual assistants, online tutoring, freelance writing. Most of it sounded either too technical, too expensive to start, or like scams. She was exhausted and overwhelmed and about to give up when she stumbled across an article titled, "How I Made $50,000 Selling Digital Products as a Complete Beginner." Digital products. Things like printables, planners, templates, guides. You created them once and could sell them infinitely. No inventory. No shipping. Low startup costs. The article was written by a woman named Amy who'd started at 58 after getting laid off. She'd created budget planners and sold them on Etsy for $4.97 each. Built it up to a full-time income over 18 months. Trish read that article 5 times. Then she read everything else she could find about selling digital products. By 6 a.m. she had a plan. Or at least the beginning of one. She drove to the library when it opened at 9. Used their free Wi-Fi and computers to research more. created a free Canva account, started watching YouTube tutorials on how to design printables. Over the next week, Trish lived in the library during the day and her car at night. She was running on adrenaline and desperation. She used the last $200 in her account to open an Etsy shop, $15, and create her first product. She thought about what she knew, what she'd done for 35 years. Managing a household on a budget. Organizing schedules for 3 kids with different activities. Meal planning. Event coordination. She created a family command center printable bundle. Weekly meal planners, cleaning checklists, kids' activity schedules, budget trackers. Everything she'd used herself but in downloadable, printable format. Took her 4 days to design in Canva. She had no idea what she was doing. Watched dozens of tutorials. Made mistakes. Started over. But finally she had something she was proud of. She listed it on Etsy for $7.99. Wrote a description based on templates she'd researched. Used all the tags and keywords she'd learned about. Then she waited. Nothing happened for 3 days. Trish was starting to think she'd wasted her time and money when she got an email notification at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night. You made a sale! Someone in Ohio had bought her family command center bundle for $7.99. After Etsy's fees, Trish made $6.19. She sat in her car in the Planet Fitness parking lot and cried. Not sad tears this time. Relief. Hope. Proof that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. That first sale changed something in her. It wasn't about the money, though God knows she needed it. It was about the possibility. Someone out there, someone she'd never met, had found value in something she'd created. Enough to pay for it. If one person would buy it, maybe others would too. Trish got to work. She created more products. A budget binder. Cleaning schedule. Pantry inventory tracker. Kids chore chart. She used her years of household management experience and turned it into products other moms could use. She listed them all on Etsy. Priced between $4.99 and $9.99. Sales started trickling in. 1 or 2 a day. Then 5. Then 10. She studied what sold well and made more of it. She read every article she could find about Etsy SEO, product photography, marketing. She joined Facebook groups for Etsy sellers and asked questions. By the end of October, she'd made $387. In November, $612. In December, $1,043. It wasn't enough to rent an apartment, but it was hope, momentum, progress. Trish was still living in her car, still showering at Planet Fitness, still keeping it secret from her kids. But now she had something to work toward. She found a local coffee shop with good Wi-Fi that didn't mind if she worked there all day as long as she bought a coffee every few hours. The staff got to know her. The manager, a young woman named Maria, started letting her stay after closing to work as long as she locked up. Trish spent 12 to 14 hours a day working on her Etsy shop, creating products, researching keywords, responding to customer messages, learning everything she could about digital marketing. She was obsessed. This was the first thing in decades that was entirely hers. Not for her husband, not for her kids. Hers. Christmas was hard. Her kids invited her to their homes. Jessica in Seattle, Michael in Denver, Sarah in Phoenix. Trish made excuses. Said she was traveling with friends. Couldn't afford the flight. Would see them in the new year. She spent Christmas Day in her car, working on designs, trying not to think about the warm houses and family dinners she was missing. But something happened that day. She made 27 sales. People buying her planners and organizers, getting ready for the new year. She made $143 in a single day. And she realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something. In January 2025, Trish hit a milestone. She made $2,100 in a single month. Her products were gaining traction. She was getting reviews, almost all positive. People loved what she was creating. She still couldn't afford an apartment, but she could afford to eat better, to get her car's oil changed, to replace her worn-out shoes. More importantly, she could afford hope. Maria at the coffee shop pulled her aside one day in late January. "Trish, I don't know your situation, and you don't have to tell me. But I notice you're here every single day from open to close. And I've seen you sleeping in your car." Trish's face went hot with shame. She started to make an excuse. "I'm not judging," Maria interrupted gently. "I've been there. Different circumstances, but I've been there. Look, my roommate just moved out. I have a spare bedroom. It's small, but it's yours for $400 a month if you want it. No deposit. Just help me keep the place clean." Trish cried. Again. She seemed to cry a lot these days. But these were good tears. She moved into Maria's spare bedroom the next week. It was tiny. Barely fit a twin bed and a small desk. But it had a roof. A door that locked. A real bathroom. Kitchen. For the first time in 4 months, Trish had a home. With stable housing, everything got easier. She could work more efficiently, sleep better, think clearer, and her Etsy business continued to grow. February, $2,847. March, $3,421. April, $4,156. She expanded beyond just household organization. Started creating products for specific niches she researched. Budgeting planners for single moms, meal prep guides for busy professionals, cleaning schedules for people with ADHD. She learned about Pinterest marketing and started driving traffic to her shop. Created a simple Instagram account showcasing her products. Joined her first product sales to an email list. But more than the money, though the money was life-changing, Trish was finding herself again. Or maybe finding herself for the first time. For 35 years, she'd been defined by her roles. Wife, mother, homemaker. Those were important, but they weren't the whole of who she was. Now, at 61, she was discovering she was also creative, entrepreneurial, resilient, capable. She was discovering she could learn. Technology that had intimidated her. Canva, Etsy, Pinterest, email marketing became tools she mastered. Skills she'd thought were beyond her became second nature. She was discovering she didn't need a man to take care of her. Didn't need to depend on anyone. Could create her own security, her own future, her own identity. In May, 6 months after starting, Trish hit $5,000 in a single month. She stared at the number in her Etsy dashboard and couldn't quite believe it. She'd gone from $847 and homeless to making more in a month than she'd ever made in her life. She finally told her kids. Called them on a video chat, all 3 together, and came clean about everything. The homelessness, car, the shame, and the business she'd built. Jessica cried. "Mom, why didn't you tell us? We would have helped." "I know, sweetie. But I needed to prove to myself I could do this. That I wasn't just a victim of what happened. That I could build something of my own." Sarah, always the practical one, asked, "So what's next? Where do you go from here?" Trish smiled. "Bigger. I'm going to grow this. Turn it into something real. Prove that 61 isn't too old to start over. Isn't too old to build a future." And that's exactly what she did. Building the empire. With $5,000 a month coming in consistently, Trish faced a decision. Play it safe and coast, or go all in and see how big she could build this. She chose to go all in. She invested in better tools. Upgraded to Canva Pro. Bought a used laptop so she didn't have to rely on the library computers. Took an online course on Etsy marketing for $97. The first money she'd spent on education in 40 years. But more importantly, she started thinking bigger. She was making good money with her household organization printables. But she was leaving money on the table. She could feel it. She started researching other successful Etsy sellers. Studied what they were doing differently. And she noticed a pattern. The ones making 6 figures weren't just selling products. They were building brands. Trish created a brand name. Second Act Printables. The name was intentional. It represented what she was living. A second act after life fell apart. She designed a simple logo. created a cohesive visual style for all her products, wrote an About section on her Etsy shop telling her story. Not all of it, but enough. Divorced at 60. Started over. Building a new life. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Women, mostly women over 50, started leaving comments, sending messages, telling her their own stories of divorce, loss, starting over. Her products weren't just printables anymore. They were symbols of resilience. Sales jump. June. $6,847. July. $8,234. Trish realized she'd accidentally tapped into something powerful. There was a massive market of women her age who were going through similar struggles and were hungry for resources, community, and proof that it wasn't too late to rebuild. She expanded her product line to address this market directly. Created a Fresh Start budget planner, specifically for women starting over after divorce. A Rebuilding at 50+ life planning guide. A Solo Living Essentials bundle. Every product came from her lived experience. Every template solved a problem she'd personally faced. And her customers could tell it was authentic. August brought a turning point. A blogger who wrote about midlife reinvention discovered Trish's shop and wrote a feature article. How this 61-year-old went from homeless to $8,000 per month selling printables. The article went viral. Trish's Etsy shop got slammed with orders. Her website crashed. Her email inbox filled with hundreds of messages from women wanting to know how she did it. She made $14,327 in August. Trish stared at that number for a long time. It was more than Richard had made in many months with his high-powered real estate job. And she'd done it from a spare bedroom with a $300 laptop and no formal business training. But with success came challenges. She was overwhelmed. Orders were coming in faster than she could handle the customer service. She was working 16-hour days and burning out. Maria found her crying at her desk one night at 2 a.m. "You okay?" "I don't know how to do this," Trish admitted. "It's grown so fast and I'm just one person and I don't know what I'm doing." "Then get help," Maria said simply. "You can afford it now. Hire someone." Trish had never hired anyone in her life. The idea terrified her. But Maria was right. She posted on Upwork looking for a virtual assistant to help with customer service and order processing. Found a woman in the Philippines named Grace who was experienced, professional, and cost $8 an hour. Hiring Grace changed everything. Suddenly, Trish had time to focus on creating products and growing the business instead of drowning in administrative tasks. She hired a second VA to help with social media. Then a graphic designer to help create products faster and at higher quality. She was building a team. At 62 years old, building an actual business. September. $17,643. October. $21,238. Trish moved out of Maria's spare room and into her own one-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was hers. She furnished it slowly with pieces from Goodwill and Facebook Marketplace. Every item felt like a victory. She bought herself a new car. Nothing extravagant, a certified pre-owned Toyota Camry. But it was hers, paid in cash, and she cried when she drove it off the lot. For her 62nd birthday in November, her kids flew to Arizona to celebrate with her. They toured her apartment, met Maria, heard the whole story of the past year. Michael, who worked in finance, looked at her business numbers and shook his head in amazement. "Mom, do you realize you're on track to make over $200,000 this year? From printables you design in Canva." Trish did realize, and it still felt surreal. But the money, while life-changing, wasn't the most important part. The most important part was the messages she got every single day from customers. Women who were going through divorces and using her budget planners to rebuild their finances. Single moms using her meal planning templates to save money and time. Women who'd lost jobs at 55 or 60 and were using her products to organize their job searches or side hustles. One message in particular stuck with her. From a woman named Dorothy, 67, recently widowed. Your story gave me hope that it's not too late for me. I bought your Fresh Start planner and I'm using it to plan my next chapter. Thank you for showing me that age is just a number." Trish printed that message and put it on her desk. That's what this was really about. Not just making money, though financial independence was incredible after decades of depending on Richard, but showing other women that reinvention was possible. That 60, 65, 70 wasn't the end. Could be a beginning. In December, a woman named Susan reached out. She ran a podcast called Midlife Reimagined and wanted to interview Trish about her journey from homeless at 61 to six-figure entrepreneur at 62. Trish hesitated. Talking about being homeless was still deeply shameful. But she agreed. And sharing her story on that podcast changed everything again. The episode went viral in the midlife women's community. Suddenly, Trish was getting interview requests from other podcasts, blogs, even a local news station. She started getting emails from women asking not just to buy her products, but to learn how she did it. How did you learn Canva? How did you figure out Etsy? How did you go from 0 to 6 figures in a year? She created a simple PDF guide. How I built a 6-figure Etsy business after 60, and offered it for free in exchange for email addresses. 5,000 women downloaded it in the first week. Trish realized she'd stumbled into something even bigger than her printables business. She had knowledge and experience that thousands of women desperately wanted, and she could teach them. In January 2026, she launched her first paid course, Digital Products for Second Act Success. It was a step-by-step program teaching women over 50 how to create and sell digital products like she had. She priced it at $297. Was terrified no one would buy it. 127 women enrolled in the first launch. That was $37,719 in a week. Trish sat at her desk, staring at the PayPal notifications, and laughed until she cried. 18 months ago, she'd been sleeping in her car with $847 to her name. Now she'd made almost $38,000 in 7 days teaching other women how to do what she'd done. Her kids couldn't believe it. Jessica kept asking if she was sure the numbers were right. Michael wanted to help her set up an LLC and get proper accounting. Sarah just kept saying, "You're amazing, Mom." But Trish didn't feel amazing. She felt grateful, humbled, and deeply committed to making sure other women knew they could do this too. Because if a 61-year-old woman with no business experience, no college degree, and no money could build a 6-figure business from her car and a library computer, anyone could. The question wasn't whether it was possible. The question was whether they'd be brave enough to try. The ripple effect. By spring 2026, Trish's life was unrecognizable from 2 years earlier. She was running 2 successful businesses. Her Etsy shop pulling in $25,000 to $30,000 per month, and her education business teaching other women how to do the same, bringing in another $40,000 to $50,000 per month depending on course launches. She'd moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment with a dedicated office space. She had a savings account with 6 months of expenses. She'd bought herself a new wardrobe, not designer clothes, but nice things that fit well and made her feel good. But the transformation wasn't just external. Trish had become a different person. Confident, self-assured. She spoke up in conversations instead of deferring to others. Made decisions quickly instead of second-guessing herself. Walked into rooms with her shoulders back. Her daughter Sarah commented on it during a visit. "Mom, you're different. You seem, I don't know, lighter, happier." "I am," Trish said. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm not dependent on anyone. Built this, me. And no one can take it away from me." That independence was everything. More valuable than the money, though the money was certainly nice. In March, something unexpected happened. Richard reached out. He'd somehow found out about her success, probably through mutual friends or social media. He sent a long email saying he'd made mistakes, that leaving her had been the biggest regret of his life, that he wanted to talk about reconciliation. 2 years ago, that email would have devastated Trish, would have made her question everything. would have tempted her to take him back just to have that security again. No. She read it once, deleted it, and went back to work. She didn't need him. Didn't need his approval or his money or his presence in her life. She was building something far more valuable than a marriage held together by dependence and obligation. She was building herself. But Trish's story wasn't just about her anymore. The women in her course, she called them her second act sisters, were having their own breakthroughs. Linda, 58, divorced and living with her sister, launched an Etsy shop selling wedding planning printables. Made $3,000 in her first month. Barbara, 64, widowed and on a fixed income, created budgeting templates for seniors and was supplementing her Social Security with an extra $1,500 a month. Denise, 60, had been laid off from her corporate job and was told she was too old to get hired again. She created resume templates and LinkedIn guides for women over 50. Was now making more than she had in her corporate job. Every success story fueled Trish's mission. She wasn't just teaching a skill. She was giving women hope. Showing them that reinvention was possible. That age didn't define ability. That starting over at 50, 60, even 70 wasn't just possible. It could be the best thing that ever happened to you. In April, Trish was invited to speak at a women's conference in Phoenix. Her first public speaking event. She was terrified. She stood backstage, watching the 300 women in the audience, and almost backed out. Who was she to give advice? She was just a divorced woman who'd gotten lucky with an Etsy shop. But then she remembered sleeping in her car. A shame. A fear. The certainty that her life was over at 61. The room went silent. I was 61 years old. Divorced. Broke. No college degree. No career. My kids pitted me. Pitted myself. I thought my life was over. That I'd missed my chance. That I was too old to start over. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Women her age. Women older. Women younger. All listening. I was wrong. The best chapter of my life started at 61. In a Walmart parking lot. At 2 a.m. When I refused to give up. She told her story. All of it. The divorce. The homelessness. First sale. The growth. The struggle. The triumph. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Women lined up afterward to hug her, to thank her, to tell her their own stories. One woman, 68, grabbed both her hands and said through tears, "You just gave me my life back. Thought I was done. But if you could do it, maybe I can too." That moment crystallized everything for Trish. This was her purpose. Not just building businesses, though she loved that, but showing women that it's never too late. That reinvention is always possible. That age is just a number and your best years might still be ahead of you. By summer 2026, Trish had scaled both businesses to the point where she needed real help. She hired a business coach who helped her systemize everything. Brought on more virtual assistants. Hired a course manager to handle her educational programs. She started a podcast. Second Act Success Stories. Every week, she interviewed women over 50 who'd reinvented themselves. Teachers who became consultants. Corporate refugees who started creative businesses. Women who'd lost everything and rebuilt. Podcast took off. Within 3 months, it was getting 50,000 downloads per episode. Major media started paying attention. She was featured in Forbes, Entrepreneur Magazine, AARP. She did a segment on Good Morning America about graypreneurship, the rise of entrepreneurs over 50. In September, Trish hit a milestone she never could have imagined. She grossed $100,000 in a single month. Between her Etsy shop, her courses, her coaching program, and affiliate income from tools she recommended, she brought in 6 figures in 30 days. She'd gone from $847 and sleeping in her car to a 6-figure month in 2 years. But the number that mattered more to her was different. 5,000. That's how many women had now gone through her course. 5,000 women over 50 who were now building their own digital product businesses, creating their own financial independence, writing their own second act stories. Before Thanksgiving 2026, all 3 of her kids came to her apartment. For the first time in years, she hosted, made the meal herself in her own kitchen, sat at her own table in her own home that she'd paid for with money she'd earned. As they sat around the table, Jessica raised her glass to Mom, who showed us that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. Later that night, after her kids had left, Trish sat in her office and reflected on the journey. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, broken, defeated, sleeping in her car, convinced her life was over. She thought about every moment of doubt, every time she wanted to give up, every customer service issue that made her cry, every technical problem that made her feel stupid, every moment she questioned whether she could really do this. And she thought about the woman she was now, a successful entrepreneur, teacher, mentor, a woman who'd proven that 61 wasn't too old, that starting over wasn't just possible, it could be the beginning of your best life. She opened her laptop and started writing. Not a product, not a course, memoir. She titled it, Never Too Late, How I Found Financial Independence at 61 and You Can Too. Because Trish had learned something profound through this journey. Your circumstances don't define you. Your age doesn't limit you. Your past doesn't determine your future. At 61, she'd lost everything. Her marriage, her home, her security, her identity. At 63, she'd built something better than she'd ever had before. Not just financial independence, though that was transformative, but self-sufficiency, confidence, purpose, proof that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. The divorce that had felt like the end of her life had actually been the beginning. The homelessness that had crushed her had forged her. The moment she hit rock bottom had been the moment she found solid ground to build from. Every woman who bought her products, took her course, listened to her podcast, or heard her speak was proof that her story mattered, that her pain had purpose, that her second act was inspiring thousands of other second acts. Richard had taken a lot from her, but he'd also inadvertently given her something. The opportunity to discover who she really was. Not somebody's wife, not just somebody's mother, but Patricia Morgan, entrepreneur, teacher, survivor, fiver. And she was just getting started. At 63, Trish had bigger dreams than she'd had at 23. She was planning to write that book, launch a non-profit helping homeless women start businesses, create a scholarship fund for women over 50 going back to school. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. It's never too late to start over. Never too late to learn something new. Never too late to build the life you want. Your second act can be bigger than your first. Your 60s can be more powerful than your 30s. And sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you is actually the beginning of the best thing. Trish Morgan had proven it. And now she was helping thousands of other women prove it too. One second act at a time.